Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's episode, I'm going to review the film Wolfman. So this is a film I was very much looking forward to. Leigh Whannell is a great writer and director. He is the writer and director of Wolfman. He got his big start with the first Saw movie, which is really awesome, and then he did a few of those afterwards, which I also really enjoyed. Saw 3 in particular, I think is one of the better sequels. And he collaborated with James Wan, the director of Saw, for several movies after that. That's kind of how he became a big name, and James Wan also became a big name. So the two of them were kind of like a dynamic duo for a little bit. Then they kind of split a little bit. I mean, still friends, I think. And then Leigh Whannell went on to direct. He made a big splash with a few of his movies. First, he did Insidious Chapter 3, which I have not seen. I still need to see that film along with the others, but I've heard it's good. I've heard it's one of the better movies in the Insidious franchise. James Wan directed the first few Insidious movies. And then he did a small sci-fi movie called Upgrade, which was really cool, actually. A very small movie that came out at the time. Not a lot of people saw it, but it's a lot of fun. It's basically everything I wanted out of the first Venom movie, oddly enough. It's like about this, it's like a robotic chip that gets put in this guy's head and sort of controls his body and stuff like that, and it's really cool. It's a good movie. And after that, he did a modern version of The Invisible Man, a classic monster movie. Great film. Elizabeth Moss was amazing in it, and I thought the idea of making the movie about an abusive relationship and feeling constantly watched was effective and haunting. It was a really nice modern take on the Invisible Man monster, and making it a little, less of a monster movie and more of just like a stalker thriller was really good idea. And then when he announced he was going to make a Wolfman movie, I got very excited. One quick disclaimer though before beginning, I went to see this movie and got to the theater on time. I went to get concessions, and when I got into the theater, like maybe a couple minutes after the scheduled showtime, the movie was already on. And I was like really surprised because I'm always on time, like I try to get there, to watch all the previews and all that stuff. But I don't know, for some reason they just forgot to add trailers. I asked the manager afterwards, and he said someone just didn't add it to the playlist by accident, and, he gave me a free pass, but I still missed those first few minutes of the movie, and I don't think I missed that much. I mean, I still, like, the first, bit of the movie is like a prologue of sorts. I got to see, I think, like, probably the second half of that prologue, but it was a little disappointing that I missed the beginning of it. I did try to return to watch the first bit of it, but I unfortunately was unable to because the next time I went, apparently they didn't have trailers again, so I missed that. And so I'm really just going to review this movie with what I did see, which is a vast majority of it. I mean, I wouldn't review it at all if I missed more than I did, really. If I missed, like, the whole prologue, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable reviewing it, but I did see a good portion of it, so I think I'm safe in that regard. But just know that in case, there's any points here that I say that maybe you're like, oh, the prologue did explain that better. Just keep that in mind. And with that being said, let's start off with the good in this movie. Firstly, I really like the angle Leigh Whannell takes in this film. I appreciate that between this and The Invisible Man, he tries to do something bold and different than what the original movies were. Like, he tries to really reinvent them and give you a different lore and a different side to this kind of monster than we're used to, which I think is great. I mean, it deserves a lot of credit because it's easy to do what others have already done, especially with all these reboots and remakes nowadays. Everyone just kind of, makes the same movie. Nosferatu is a good example, I think, of taking that original source material and remaking it in a way that still feels different. In this film, though, The Wolfman, like, it's completely different than what the original was. Like, I watched the original a few days ago just to kind of compare, and I did enjoy the original, but this movie is so different from that. And I like a lot of the ideas here. To have the movie be about trauma and scarred children, and parents who are trying to avoid scarring their children, it's really interesting. It makes the whole transformation over the course of the movie scarier because the father is scared of what he's becoming. You can see, like, on his in his face that he doesn't like what's happening to him. He thinks he's like dying, and he just wants to protect his daughter. He doesn't want anything bad to happen to her. So seeing this happen to him and him kind of not sure what's happening makes the whole thing a bit more complicated, and I think a bit more sad in some ways because you just In the Wolfman, like, in all these other werewolf movies, like, it's just the guy transforms, he goes back, and it's like, it's a whole process. In this movie, though, it's like a slow decline of this guy, and I think that's pretty cool. It's a good idea. And speaking of the transformation, it's well done. The way it's handled is more like The Fly than a traditional werewolf movie, which I really dug, but I'm sure that change will be controversial to some. And if you don't know what I mean, The Fly is just kind of like this very long, over the course of the entire movie, just a very slow progression of turning into The Fly. Whereas, like, in a traditional werewolf movie, as I kind of said, like, it's just like one night, just it happens entirely, and then it goes back to normal. Like, in this movie, it's just really focusing on this one night, just this slow progression into what it is. And, it just doesn't come quickly. It's a very slow burn in that sense. But there's lots of practical effects, which I appreciated. There's really not a lot of CGI as far as I can tell. I mean, maybe in some of, like, the visual ways, like, it communicates some things that it was, but just the actual transformation itself seemed very practical and made it also a bit scarier in that sense. There's also great sound design. One scene in particular that really shows the impact of the heightened senses with, like, hearing and how perception can be different from that way. I think that was really cool, a really neat idea for a scene. And there's a few like that just kind of over the course of the movie, you really see a different heightened sense of things visually and audibly. And kind of as I said, visually, there's an interesting thing going on to show how the main character sees everything around him once his transformation begins. The change in perspective is a nice trick this movie has up its sleeve, and you can always rely on Leigh Whannell to do something stylistically unique, and he definitely does here. Like, the way you kind of see things visually with the different colors and the lighting, it just kind of almost looks like otherworldly compared to what everyone else is seeing, and that, I think, just, again, adds to how this movie kind of communicates, like, this guy's just not, in the same world anymore. Like, this guy's mentally in a different place. But on the other side of this transformation are the wife and daughter who are basically trapped with someone who is slowly losing himself, which is also pretty scary. I mean, they're in this, like, one place in the woods, and just kind of seeing these people all kind of trapped together, and they don't really understand what's happening. And you just see this guy, like, slowly lose himself, and you just see the wife and daughter, like, kind of worried about him. Again, makes it pretty scary because they don't know what's coming. We do as an audience, and that makes it also scary because we're like, please don't let this go on too long. But you can understand why the characters do. It kind of excuses a bit of the, the dumb choices maybe they would make because they don't really know what's happening. They think he's just sick, and they think he's just dying, but, to us, we know that it's something else. And another thing to note here is the performances. Christopher Abbott does a good job. He has a more complicated job, I think, than a lot of people, because for half of the movie, he has to be a lot more physical, and he has to convey a lot through his face alone. Like, there's a large portion of the movie where he doesn't really talk, and he has to really just show everything through his face, and, the worry and the pain and sort of, like, the confusion all in his face, and he does a good job of that. I think it might be a little, he might not get enough credit for that because, it may seem like his performance is just kind of like moving a lot, just kind of, looking very one note, but I think there is a lot going on in his performance that needs to be said. And I know that for a time, Ryan Gosling was attached to be in this movie. I do wish, kind of, we did get to see that Ryan Gosling cut. I think he would have done an excellent job here too. But I think Christopher Abbott does a very good job as well, and I'm happy we got him in this film. Julia Garner is also very talented. She has a lot of screen time here, but her character doesn't give quite that much to work with, and I'll get more into that soon. So, I mean, I think she was very good. I just don't really feel like there was enough for her to do. Like, she was just looking very scared the whole movie, which she did a great job of, but other than that, I didn't really feel like there was quite as much to her performance. And then there's Matilda Firth, who plays the young daughter and does a good job as well. I think for a child actor, she does a really great job. She shows a lot of fear and also this love inside too, and just this concern. I think, everyone in the main cast does a good job. It's really just the characters themselves that I think need work, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And lastly, There are a handful of individual scenes that are neat. Most of them are related to the actual transformation itself and how the body and mind change throughout the film. I think those were really cool. You get a lot of those scenes just like seeing slow transformation, slow like hair loss and teeth changing and nails and all that stuff. Like stuff that gets under your skin, but it really, they're just really cool scenes. They're well done, very practical. Appreciated that a lot. But as for the rest of this movie, it's not that good. The themes, which I mentioned prior, and I think there are a lot of good themes here, they're compelling. Themes about scarring, parenting, isolation, illness, generational trauma. The thing is that the movie constantly feels the need to shout out the themes over and over and over again, so they lack subtlety. Like, I can think of probably like 3 scenes offhand where the characters literally just like repeat themselves, like, and I love you or something, and it's just like, I just want to protect you. It's just over and over again. And at a certain point, you're just kind of like, I get it. Please, you can move on already. Because I think themes are great when they just feel implemented into the story. But the way the movie does it here, you get so much of that in the first half. And then in the second half, it doesn't really feel like it's paying that much attention to it anymore. Like, you get a little bit of it again, but I just think it plays a little too much. You get the message. It could have just moved on and tried to do things a little better. I think it's a little bit too much, like, tell, not enough show. So that's kind of where I'm at with the themes here. And the characters themselves are also very bland and flat. So it's a bit hard to get invested in their safety, which is really important in a movie like this. Like, you should really feel... I mean, I think I said this before. People say, like, when the characters are in danger, you are much more scared for them. And in this case, I just didn't care that much about the characters. You do get a decent amount of time with them in the beginning of the movie to really, kind of spend enough time to really, like, see what the situation is, but it oddly doesn't feel like nearly enough once things get going, because once this movie, like, really gets going, once they get to, like, the woods and this, this whole area outside of their home, it kicks in, like, fully, and you don't really get any character development past that point for a lot of the characters, for a large portion of the movie. And the story is not that interesting as well. Outside of the transformation, which I'll get, I keep talking about the transformation. It's by far the best part of this movie. But outside of that, it's kind of boring and maybe dull. Like, you spend a vast majority of the runtime in this old house in the woods at night. There's not much light. Like, it's very dark out. There's not a lot of momentum until late in the movie. And it's paced pretty slow, but not like not in a slow burn kind of way where you're really like, ooh, like, I'm getting in the mood here. It's more slow, like, all right, can we move on already? Like, a little bit of that. So all of this mixed with forgettable characters and a lackluster exploration of the themes makes for a very underwhelming movie, in my opinion. And even by the third act, when things get more crazy, I was hoping to feel a bit more emotionally and be more on the edge of my seat too. Like, I just was never that engaged with what was happening. I was just kind of like, okay, this is happening now. Let's move on. I just really, like, I think if they were going to do the Fly approach, make it a very slow transformation, I think you need the characters to be better, or there needs to be a more interesting secondary plot line that's like, why are they really in these woods? Like, maybe there's something else happening with the characters. It's just not emotionally satisfying, especially with the wife and daughter. They have, like, the beginning of a character arc, and they just don't really get to complete it very much, so I don't know, it just felt a little unsatisfying in that way. So I don't know, it's not a bad movie. It certainly has interesting qualities, and I can see what it's going for. Like, I think Leigh Whannell, like, I see all the ideas he had, and I see all of them, like, they could have been great, but it needed a lot more in the script in particular to elevate things, because outside of the Wolfman transformation and seeing the physical and mental effects of it, there's just not that much to latch on to, and a lot of the time I was just waiting for the next major thing to happen so the movie could hopefully improve, which isn't a good sign. Like, especially in the first half of this movie, I was like, I just want to see, like, I want to get further in this transformation, like, I want to get going. So, I don't know, it's a very mixed bag. Good ideas, a lot of good ideas, but very underwhelming execution. I'm not sure what happened because Leigh Whannell is a talented and smart writer. He's done a lot of really good stuff. I think The Invisible Man in particular really just showed how, as a writer and director, he has such a good vision of what he wants to do and make it scary, make it smart, make it, interesting and different, and take a lot of risks. He takes a lot of risks here too, and I really appreciate the risks he takes, but I just don't think a lot of them paid off in the way maybe he was intending them to, at least for me. I'm not sure if he was rushed for this film or just needed a few more drafts. I mean, after all, this is a Blumhouse movie. I mean, he did Blumhouse with The Invisible Man as well, and that came out great. He was definitely on the right track with the whole thing, but I thought this was a massive disappointment. Definitely one of the bigger letdowns of the year, I'm sure. The year's just beginning, but I can already tell that this is going to be one of the bigger disappointments of the entire year. If you're really a big werewolf fan, you love the Wolfman, and you love American Werewolf in London, maybe give it a shot. Maybe this movie will do more for you than it did for me if you love these kinds of movies. But I think if you're just a general horror fan and you're just looking for a good horror movie, I think this was pretty disappointing. You can probably skip it. I don't know, just go watch, one of Leigh Whannell's other films. Go watch The Invisible Man, or even if you're more sci-fi, go watch Upgrade. These are great films. Or I don't know, Insidious Chapter 3. I haven't watched that, so I don't know if I can really recommend it, but I don't know, Saw, any of his movies. He's a really good writer and director. Go check his other stuff out, but Wolfman could have been a lot better. I'm going to give it a C. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.